get started. Got a few more people. If anybody needs to grab any coffee real fast, and we'll get started. Everybody fixed? If you would, this is kind of like, come on down. We're trying to get people more here in the center. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep, okay. So I'm Kim Wilson, Vice President of Human Resources, and it is certainly my pleasure to introduce our closing keynote speaker, Leslie Traub, this morning. She's going to be speaking about the hallmarks of inclusive leadership. And 2 years ago, when we sort of started investigating unconscious bias, and Patrice Carroll, who heads up our training and development to help with organize this entire event, she started researching unconscious bias. And it was interesting because there was one name that kept popping up over and over in pretty much every major publication. Anywhere you went, there was one name that was quoted as kind of being an authority on unconscious bias, and that name was Cook Ross. So after a very, unfortunately, a lengthy vetting process, an RFP process, we were pleased to begin a partnership with Cook Ross, which is now about 18 months that we've been in a partnership. So some of you have maybe met Leslie before because she's been on campus. She's done 2 3-day learning labs around unconscious bias. She has trained all of our board of trustees. She was doing a session with them even yesterday. So we are thrilled to have her with us this morning to talk to us about the hallmarks of inclusive leadership. So let me tell you a little bit about Leslie. Leslie has more than 25 years of experience leading gender programs, diversity, inclusion, cultural competence, and change management initiatives. Leslie creates sustainable systems of change that yield greater performance, profit, and possibility. Leslie is especially interested in building gender equity in global corporations through full engagement of women, men, and organizational structures and systems. Leslie is a fellow in change management from Johns Hopkins University, holds a master's in biostatistics and epidemiology from Tulane University, a BA in economics and history from Wheaton College in Massachusetts, and a certificate in training and development from the University of Maryland. So if you ask Leslie, what do you do in 5 words or less? She will answer, stimulate people to think of different perspectives. If you ask her what gives you hope, she says working with organizations that support their employees at all levels to challenge the status quo, challenge their way of thinking, and make decisions that are broader-minded and more inclusive. If you ask her, what's more important to you, to be right or to be liked? She answers, ask her husband. What's the best advice that she's ever got? Pursue the toughest, most rigorous degree program that you can. Never take the easy road just because you can. So with that, I'm pleased to welcome Leslie.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everyone. I've got to change that thing on the website about being right, as your husband. Every time somebody quotes that, I watch him cringe a little bit. I think I do too. Morning, everybody. So nice to be here. Nice to see you. My very first piece of work here was in this room with the president and the leadership team, and it was a memorable day. How many of you were there? In that room, two of you, lovely. Thank you for coming back. Patrice and Kim have asked me to give you a broader perspective here on the work that we're doing that is in line with this program that you're having this week, to look at some of the broader tenets of inclusive leadership. Before I do that, I want to talk about social belonging. And the reason I want to talk about social belonging is that's the reason for inclusive leadership. And we don't always have a great line of sight into the why. And the why we're doing this work, why UK has invested so much of its sort of emotional and mental and fiscal resources into this work is because of this piece about social belonging. I've recently learned something new, which I like to think of myself as a learner. I've learned about what's called the default neural network. The default neural network is the way what the brain processes when it isn't doing tasks. So, you know, when we're very focused on things, we're not very present to what's happening in the background. The default neural network is the background. What the default network focuses on is social cognition. It's about me and you. When we're not thinking about tasks, I'm sure that you've had the experience when you've taken a breath. What comes forward is processing, like, how did I just do? What do they think of me? What do I think of them? It's in a very unconscious space. But what's fascinating to me is that this is the place where we're processing our social belonging. It's always operating in the background, but we're not always conscious of it. So when I learned that, I really got a line of sight into how critically important belonging is in institutions, certainly in families. You know, we can start at that most integral of institution, our family, and we go out. You know, this is this community of whatever, 43,000 people. And I think what's resonated the most for the work that we've done in the last 18 months has been this notion about belonging. So I'm going to begin with a little video to just tee this up. Some of you may have seen this. Let's see if this all works here. You have to listen carefully to what's being said in the background. You're going to love it, she says, the little sister. So if you can't clearly see the scene, she's been given a doll with a prosthetic leg, and she has a prosthetic leg herself. So this talk isn't about 10-year-olds with prosthetic legs, but what it is about is the power of having ourselves mirrored back to us. And, you know, this may not be relevant on a campus basis, although I think some of you probably think that it is. That what we all long for in our being is to feel whole and complete for who we are, regardless of what it is about us that makes us different. And so being in a place where we are mirrored in some way, not like if I'm in a wheelchair, I need somebody else to be in a wheelchair facing me, but to feel seen, which is one of the critical ways that I feel whole and complete, and to not be invisible and to be acknowledged, and to not have whatever it is about me that is different have me feel ashamed of it because we don't talk about it, is one of the critical aspects of belonging. Some of you may be familiar with the Zulu greeting, I see you, and the response, I am here to be seen. And I think that these are very powerful statements. When I've used them in exercises and in training, it evokes something very profound in people. It's simply the statement, I see you, and then receiving that, I am here to be seen. It's a beautiful exchange of equity. And so when we talk about inclusive leadership embodies this quality of seeing the people who are around me, whether it's faculty to student, staff to administration, staff to the community, whatever the dynamic is, it's all of it is important. Now, we know about Maslow's hierarchy, we know about belonging. I'm sure all of you do. If you've not been sitting in training with me or your colleagues who are doing the unconscious bias work, what we know is, first of all, that the hierarchy was created by McGraw-Hill people. And Maslow didn't have this in an order. Different aspects of this came through at different times in our lives, but it worked nicer in a textbook. That's just fun facts to know and share. But what we know not only from neuroscience research, but also from the good works of Margaret Mead, who was working at the same time as Abraham Maslow, but we know so much less about her work. Do the gender math on that one. That belongingness is more essential to our survival than our physiological needs. That need to belong, to connect, to be seen is more essential to our survival. So I did a little bit of research on the impact of social rejection in academia. This is actually done in higher education. And let me see if I can find glasses here. So here's what the data shows. That when there is bullying, and bullying is a very broad term, schools with higher bullying rates scored significantly less on tests of algebra, geometry, earth science, biology, and world history. And that the social pain that comes from bullying showed dramatic results in test performance. And you can see the scores up here. You can see the difference in scores when someone is experiencing social rejection. By the way that the way that Dr. Baumeister and Leary created social pain was to tell the participants that they would be alone in their lives. That was it. They primed their brains, telling them that they would be alone for the rest of their lives, and then had them take the test. That was the bullying that created this very significant difference in results in the laboratory. We know that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the same regions of the brain that are associated with physical pain. And here's what's new to folks who've been around. The latest research out of University College in London shows that you can treat social pain with Tylenol. And that makes sense, right? If the same part of the brain that lights up with social or lack of social belonging, or exclusion rather, is the same as physical pain, why not treat that with Tylenol? So the study, in the study, they pre-treated two groups. One was a control group, and the group that was, and then they tested for social belonging over the 3-week period, and the group that was pre-treated with the Tylenol experienced less social rejection than the other group. And then they set up all of the conditions that had that test be valid. So it's just fascinating to explore this world of social belonging. And when we look at what we're here for on a university campus, why we're here, we can really get to how the social belonging piece is the glue that holds it all together. Otherwise, you've got all these groups of people working here and studying here that have no connection with each other whatsoever. The social belonging piece is a little bit the secret sauce. I work a lot in corporations, and all they want to know is, like, what's the secret formula, what's the secret sauce here. Google did a study on teams. Much of what they do is in teams. They sort of come together and move apart, come together and move apart. So it was a great vehicle for studying what makes teams work. They controlled for everything, and when it came down at the end of the day, the one variable that made a difference in performance was social cohesion of the group. And another word for social cohesion is social belonging. So I leave you with that, and here's what I'd like you to do. Take a minute at your tables and look at these 3 questions and talk to each other for a moment. So what is happening right now among students, faculty, staff, and administration that's generating social belonging? What can you point to that's actually bringing this forward, that's tending to our need for social belonging? What could be causing social isolation? And the last, what do you believe is your role from wherever you sit to mitigate against social isolation and to both invite and drive social belonging? So just take about 4 minutes and chat with each other about this.
Different things. One thing is in the residence halls, they need to single rooms in a suite. And so I feel like a lot of students don't have the experience to make new friends, and so they are isolating themselves. And now they're behind 2 doors. For our students that are trained and want to meet them, they're further away. I also see competition as being something that certainly hinders cohesion. I am in the engineering residence hall, and so very, very high stakes, and so I feel like they feel competitive with each other. And every year, I've been here for years, every year the parents and schools are actually facing to try to handle their students' problems. Whether it's like them not getting along with their roommate, or they broke their foot and the student gets the parents.
Hey, I'm pretty old. That's what we called it many years ago.
I need to hear it from them. I'm not going to make them
Try to get out of structure too on Friday.
I'm here. This is here. They don't have to.
One of the things that I've noticed
I
is
don't know
that
if it's
there seems to be a renewed, or maybe it's the first time, interest in including a lot of different programs around us. And not just that in itself, but because of that, it seems to have, even the amount of time I've been here, changed mindsets a little bit to where people are looking more toward that as something that is sort of a topic people can talk about. It's brought up more. There's more discussion, there's probably not enough discussion, but there's more certainly. And I think it's because we see like, even like this anti-bullying stuff that's going on, some of the work that's been done, it even seems like the campus police have been things that maybe in the past would have just been with us as kids being police and other things. So I've actually seen that change a little bit personally.
And I think now they feel like they have to
it up, please? So what I'd like to do is just have a couple responses. I'll repeat what you say so that people who are watching can hear your voice. So what's happening right now that's actually generating social belonging? What evidence do you see on campus that there's attention being paid to this critical issue? Yeah, thanks.
We talked about all the new buildings that are going up and how the space is being designed so that there is locations for students to, come together as a group, and both in the quiet rooms for studying and, a television room or whatever for social interaction.
Great. So there's attention being paid to the physical space that is inviting social interaction. Thank you so much. One more example of that, of what's happening right now. Yes.
This right here is a big example where campus is trying really hard to.
Great. So an event like today, where we're bringing people together, leaders together across all aspects of the organization. And by the way, here's what I want you to do. I know you're sitting with your friends, because that's what we do. But when we part, please make sure that you introduce yourself to 3 or 4 people that you don't know, and take advantage of the time when you are gathering outside of your department and across the organization. So those are 2 great examples. Thank you. What do you see as contributing to social isolation that's happening right now as well? What do you see there? What insights do you have? Yes, please.
Well, I don't see it, but people at my table, I think it's important to point out, are saying that the new space also contributes to social isolation in the way the sleeping rooms are arranged.
Everybody has their own bedroom now.
Got it.
In the residence hall.
So in the residence halls, people have their own bedrooms, which of course doesn't contribute to social isolation, but they're probably in pods, they're in suites.
They don't have to really talk to their roommate if they choose not to.
So here's one of the things to note about building design, is that we've got a couple building design with the social cohesion aspect, and be intentional about creating environments and forcing, in a way, of that level of connection. Thank you for that. One other piece about what's contributing, perhaps, to social exclusion. Anybody else talk about that one?
Silos here at the university.
Silos in the university, exactly. And it's what's critical about silos is that if we can't get outside of our silo, the world that we see, our whole frame of reference is within our function or department. And in a complex matrix system like a university, that leads generally to poor decision making. So thank you for that. So the last one, what is your role? From where you stand, wherever you are in this system, I'd like to hear from staff, faculty, administration, from all of you, if anyone's representing students as well. I'd like to get one perspective from each. What's your role in building social belonging? Yes, and tell me who you represent.
I'm in facilities resource management, and one of the things, my specific job is to assist the 560 departments of the provost board with inventory, a centralized service that's across the entire university. And each department usually has one person who does that, and then there's nobody else to help them. So they don't really have a place to go to find out, how do I do this? This is something that's not covered. So I sort of started this inventory management where I send out, I get all the people that I can get hold of that do inventory, and I give them all this information, like inside information from knowing how the system works. And so even though they're alone in their department having to do this, there are other people that they go to say, like, is anybody else having this trouble? And so I sort of built a network of people who do something just about a month and a half a year, just once a year, so it's not an ongoing thing, but when it comes up, then they have to do it for that amount of time.
Beautiful.
So it's all those people who, if they're the one in their department who has to do it, nobody else can help them. They're like, no, that's why we made you do it, because we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, so that's the way that I sort of built a network of, belonging around a certain very specific thing.
It's a really great example. So I'm just going to repeat quickly that your job as managing all of inventory across 560 departments is to create a network. And for the one person in every department who manages that so that they feel connected, and wouldn't it be crazy to have a one-day meeting in 2017 where you're actually physically bringing people together to get that social web so that when they see each other's names on that email, they'll actually have a face and it'll build even more connectivity. Beautiful example. Yes, please.
Some faculty in the College of Medicine might also play a role in leadership. And one thing that I've noticed, even university-wide, we are working on a strategic plan. And how it's referred to is as silos. There are 4 or 5 silos for the strategic plan. And I've had to say to my dean, you know, we need to look at this concept a little differently. And there's lots of overlap here, we're not. So my role, and I do diversity and inclusion in the College of Medicine, is to really kind of point out where we're not being inclusive, how we're not building interpersonal relationships with one another and working together.
Yeah, beautiful. So in your role as both faculty and leadership in the School of Medicine, that your job is to point out where our processes are exclusive. And I'm going to be talking about that courage that it takes to do that in a moment or two. Anybody representing administration that you want to share, unless that was you? That's okay. So anyone else want to share? What's your role? Okay, so here, yes, please.
In terms of students, I work with graduate students across the disciplines, and they're very anxious. Anxiety is very high about career preparation and the job market. So the graduate school is partnered with human resources, training and development to offer workshops available to grad students. And what's so beautiful to witness is when they come together across the disciplines, because they're so used to being compartmentalized. But in these workshops, for preparing future faculty, preparing future professionals, they interact and they understand that they're on a common mission.
Fabulous.
They all have a common purpose to prepare themselves.
Great. So taking advantage of the resources across the silos and functions, and by crossing them for the support of students and that they don't feel so isolated, even inside their own professions. So these are all great examples, and what you've already done, the 3 of you, and I'm sure at your tables what you've talked about, is you're practicing the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. So get out your pens, everybody, and make space for 6 things. What I wanted to say about this model is that this was created by one of my colleagues, Juliet Bork and Bernadette Dillon, who are from the Deloitte, Australia practice. Very accomplished thinkers in the diversity and inclusion world. And so I'm pleased to bring you these 6. And I'd like you to be looking at these 6, always from the perspective, and I will prompt you as well, of what is my role, what can I do from where I sit. So the first one is commitment. What do highly inclusive leaders do? Highly inclusive leaders are committed to diversity and inclusion because the objectives of D&I align with their personal values, and because they believe in why this is important, what we call the business case, but what you can call, why this is important for your future as an institution. So here's what I know about this organization. Your president has a very deep and personal commitment to this issue on attracting and graduating minority students, on attracting and retaining minority faculty, on creating a place for staff where this sense of belonging is deeply felt and brings forward your best work, where you can engage personally and meaningfully across your silos, and attending to the very human behaviors that have us feel isolated by having me have to claim my space, which means I have to take it away from you. There's a very deep and personal commitment, and here's the other thing that I know, is that an institution of this scope and size cannot ride on the coattails of one person, even from a commitment perspective, even though he is the president of the university. So for yourself, finding wherever you are, because we are all leaders in our own right, finding for yourself personally where the sense of fair play lives in you, and to not have this is one of the biggest opportunities. This is one of the places where I want to see the fastest turnaround here, is to have each and every one of you claim your why about this work for you personally. John Cotter, who is a well-known thinker in the world of change management, he says people change what they do less because they're given analysis that shifts their thinking. And we love analysis in every leader. Show me the business case, show me the numbers, show me the data. Then because they are shown a truth that influences their thinking. And this is very much heart and mind work. This is not diversity and inclusion, as you know, as someone who does work in the School of Medicine. This is not head work. This is not cognitive work. Cognitive work is a piece of it. But it's got to be the place where we personally are finding our own connection to why this is important to us. And so here are hallmarks of a committed leader. It looks like the writing might be a little bit smaller, so I'll read it. There's got to be congruence between our words and actions. I can't stand there and say that this is important to me. I have a client who sent a letter out to their organization because there was going to be unconscious bias education. And I asked my point person, I said, how committed is your senior leadership? And they said, well, they signed the letter. And I said, that wasn't enough. That there has to be congruence between words and actions. Your whole body has to say, I might not have the answer here, but I am in all of the way. That's number one. Number two is that inclusion and diversity activities figure prominently in references in the classroom, in your strategic plans, in your recruitment strategies. When I was with the Board of Trustees yesterday, and there were a few deans in there, one of them said, we're working on our strategic plans right now, and I don't really know how to put diversity into that strategic plan, but I know it needs to be there. That's a start. We don't have to know the what yet. We just need to know that it's important. Actively assess whether inclusion and belonging are happening, and don't rely on your own perspective. Because you can only see what you can see. As leaders, the organization tends to work for us. Because we're the leaders in the organization. Because we belong because of our positional power. Many of us. It's very difficult to experience the organization through the eyes of somebody else because we don't know what's happening. So assess and get your data from people who might feel the most outside of the organization. The next one, allocate resources to support D&I. Encourage people to go to training. Don't make them go to education on their own time after hours unless there are union issues that I don't know about for the moment. Of course, treating all members with fairness and respect goes without saying. And to understand the uniqueness of each team member. What this requires is time. One of the deans of the schools yesterday was saying that he's been studying himself and watching himself as he interacts with other people. And he's choosing to focus on the other person, putting his phone away and leaving it at his desk as he's managing by wandering around. And he's watching the response that he's getting from people as he's attending to each one, even if it's only for a minute. So learn about your people and invest time in that. And then finally, take whatever actions that ensure each team member is feeling connected. And again, this takes work. So, for your own personal action, I will give you 6 personal actions. If you haven't seen the Simon Sinek TED Talk, watch his TED Talk. It helps you get very clear on your why. And that's the very first thing I encourage you to do as leaders, is to find out for yourself, even if you're in the dominant culture on this campus, And diversity and inclusion is somebody else's problem because you don't experience it. I promise you, if you look into your life, you will find times when you or members of your family have experienced exclusion and to be present to the pain of that exclusion and let that fuel your why. That's point number one. Here we go to number two, courage. Courage is what gets demonstrated when you risk your own social belonging to include other people with less privilege. Courage is standing in the face of knowing that you're up for tenure and there's something you need to say to your department chair about the way that the faculty are engaging with staff or with students or with each other that you can see is clearly creating negative social belonging or social exclusion, and you say it anyway. Courage is being willing to not know the answer or the outcome when somebody wants to talk about the latest shooting or nightclub being blown up or mall being, whatever the incidences are in our world, or the election and the dynamics of the election that are playing out in our day-to-day space, which they are. Courage is not knowing how to deal with it, but to say, okay, people, I don't know where this is going to go, but I think it's an important topic for us. Let's just sit down and turn off our phones and close the door and just see what's there for us. That takes courage. Courage is speaking up and challenging the status quo and being humble as well about your strengths and weaknesses. So I have a short video for you about what I think was a very courageous act that came out last week. This is Terrence Cunningham, who is the head of all of the police organizations in the U.S., as he apologizes for what's been happening in the U.S. with the police force. Deep courage.
The laws adopted by our society have required police officers to perform many unpalatable tasks, such as ensuring legalized discrimination or even denying the basic rights of citizenship to many of our fellow Americans. While this is no longer the case, this dark side of our shared history has created a generational, almost inherited mistrust between many communities of color and the law enforcement agencies we serve. Many officers who do not share this common heritage often struggle to comprehend the reasons behind this historic mistrust. As a result, they are often unable to bridge this gap and connect with some segments of their communities. While we obviously do not change the past, it is also clear that we must change the future. We must move forward together to build a shared understanding. We must forge a path that allows us to move beyond our history and identify common solutions to better protect our communities. For our part, the first step in this process is for the law enforcement profession and the IACP to acknowledge and apologize for the actions of the past and the role that our profession has played in society's historical mistreatment of communities of color.
So you got to know that took a lot of courage to stand in front of the police organizations for the whole U.S. and to acknowledge what's happening. Now, in full transparency, because I'm conscious of time, what I cut out were his opening comments acknowledging the police force for the work that they're doing. So just so you know, this was a very balanced piece, but I wanted to hone in on what, that didn't take courage. Acknowledgement doesn't always take courage, it's important. What takes courage is, I just want to say, this is what's happening here. And so for yourselves, acknowledging and apologizing for what's happened in the past is an incredibly healing act. Even if it's something that you had nothing to do with. But just to say that it happened creates social belonging. So here are hallmarks of courageous leaders. admitting to your own shortcomings. This is difficult in institutions that value deep expertise because, of course, when we've been schooled for 25, 26 years, we don't have so many shortcomings. So, number 2, hold others to account for non-inclusive behaviors. Very, very difficult. One of the challenges, I work in 2 institutions that are the most challenging, actually 3. One is federal government, where we have a senior executive status. 2 is in partner firms like, like financial institutions that have partnerships, like accounting firms and investment banks. And the 3rd is universities, where we have tenured faculty. And these are the 3 most challenging environments to drive change. And it's because all 3 of those groups are essentially untouchable in terms of their behavior. There's no way to bring accountability in when you have guaranteed, you've got guaranteed employment for life, which is true in all 3 of those. So holding others to account for non-inclusive behaviors, we have got to be creative about this. And one of the ways that we can do this is by blowing up our personal why. Is by being so committed to the essentialness of generating belonging that we inspire. That's how we do it, is through our inspiration. Here's the 3rd one. Is to challenge the status quo as this faculty member did over here, especially when it promotes homogeneity. Hard to do, but important. Learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. We talk about this a lot in our trainings. Being willing to open a dialogue about difference without knowing where it's going to go. There's also a 360 that's based on these 6 qualities of inclusive leadership. Another very courageous thing to do is to take a 360, which is where you assess yourself and others assess you against some clearly defined behaviors of inclusive leadership, and you sit down with yourself and a coach and you say, does the way I'm occurring out there match what I think about myself? And that takes very deep courage. Tolstoy says, everybody thinks about changing the world, but nobody ever really thinks about changing themselves. So it takes courage to look in the mirror as a leader. So here's your personal action. Identify 2 to 3 people that you know you need to have a conversation with. One that will result in more social belonging for you both, and to have the conversation. I'm going to give you a moment to write down the names of 2 to 3 people, and you know who they are. We all have them. People we're a little bit incomplete with, people that we didn't say what we wanted to say, and what happens, as you're writing their names, I'll keep talking, what happens is that when we don't complete a difficult conversation, there's a brick that gets laid between us. And then, because I feel some shame about not completing that conversation, the next time I encounter them, I'm going to avoid their eyes, and then there's going to be another brick. And pretty soon, there's no access to that individual. It takes tremendous courage to clean something up. So that's my request. Go back, find out who they are, and clean them up. I'm loving seeing people writing in their books. Thank you for looking there. Number 3, bias. Now, we've been talking, those of you who've been involved in the efforts on campus know that this is the place where we've been focusing, and I think you can see now is that this is only a piece of the pie. And it's a very important piece of the pie. Juliet and Bernadette call bias the Achilles heel of a leader. Because we can hone our leadership skills and competencies our whole lives and never look at bias. And without looking at bias, that undermines the whole skill set. So highly inclusive leaders are mindful of personal and organizational blind spots, and they self-regulate to help ensure fair play. Inclusive leaders are aware of their own biases, they recognize the circumstances under which bias occurs, and they know how to overcome them. Bias occurs when we're not watching, we're not being vigilant. First, we have to have the awareness of them. And secondly, we have to recognize that when we're tired, when we're under stress, we default to our habitually patterned brains, which are patterned by the past and by stereotypes. And so that's part of the competency, is to know what they are and to know when they kick in. Inclusive leaders also focus on processes that generate bias and have enough courage and commitment to influence process owners to change. And what I mean by process is, where do we source from when it comes to talent and students? That can be very monocultural. Our sources can be very monocultural. How do we promote people? How do we develop people? Who gets opportunities for the high visibility assignments that can make or break careers? All of the processes that we have inside the system need to be examined from the perspective of bias. Inclusive leaders, even if it's not your process, you'll ask the question. Well, I think the way we're doing strategic planning right now just has us remain in silos. Is there another way? Seeing the processes that you work on. So that's number one. I want to share with you, I'm sure some of you has seen the research, writing, posting, something that came out a couple weeks ago. Mary Beth Gasman put something out on how universities don't really want faculty of color. This is about bias in the process and bias in the individual. I made the mistake when I first got this information about reading the comments. You know, I read comments like this, I just shake my head. Half of the comments were, "You're spot on. This is my lived experience. Can you mentor me? I've been in academia for 20 years and all of this is true." On the other side is, you know, my school has been going out of their way to recruit minority faculty for years. None of them ever comes. They come and they leave. This is a sham. And it's just, you know, and I read, I think at the time, now there's over 1,000. I read about 700. And I don't know why I did that. Probably because there's an incredulity, but there's also compassion for me. I also have compassion. I see opportunities for like breakthroughs when I read those. It's like just a little bit of learning and you will see the world in a different way. Maybe that's why I read them. Here's what she said. Here are the excuses. There's lack of quality among candidates because we have some falsely inflated standard in academia that to teach in academia you have to have gone to a prestigious university, where getting into prestigious universities requires social capital that many faculty of color have not had the privilege of experiencing. And so given the percentage of faculty of color who are first to college in their families. So we measure quality in a specious way. The second is I can't find any. This is another refrain, and that was very replete in the 700 and some posts that I read. The Ford Fellowship is a database of some 3,000 to 4,000 minority faculty. Research has been done on that database, asking the questions of how frequently you're invited in, how frequently will you get invited to campus, how frequently you're involved in bidding wars, where more than one university wants you, and the numbers are staggeringly low. I think the one number that pops to mind is only 11% of the people surveyed said that they were involved in multiple offers for their positions, that they spend more time in post-grad work than anybody else. And so it's fairly appalling. And it's not just that there's one source. It's that we just don't go out of our way. I've got many universities who have never gone to an HBCU. One of the deans yesterday said, his to-do, here's what I'm going to do. He said, I personally am going to go to HBCUs to recruit students for my college because I think that sends a statement. That sends a statement to my faculty and to the students who are in my college right now. that sends a message that this is something that's important. That's what inclusive leaders do, who are conscious of bias and who want to mitigate against that. I can't find any doesn't stand. We just have to look differently. You know, our firm, we only have 40 people in our firm. We do not do diversity hiring. Of course, we're a diversity and inclusion firm. But we have 3 straight white men out of 40. We have the diversity complex. I look at this all the time, and I ask myself, why are people attracted here? And you know, there's not a story or an adage, but when you have diversity begets diversity. The incredible diversity of our firm attracts people just simply on its own. We don't have to work at it because, remember the little girl with the prosthetic leg? When people look at us on the website, whatever, they see themselves and they want to be there and they present themselves. We hire for quality. We hire for talent. We don't hire for diversity. It's there. We don't have to go looking under rocks. I can't find any doesn't stand. This is the one that got me the most, is that we do a lot of exceptions for dominant culture, that's a wrong word, for dominant candidates, and that rules apply to the faculty of color. In other words, we use many exceptions. Oh, we got to get that one. She's really great. He's awesome. Yeah, but she has never published here or whatever. That's okay. We're good. But when it comes to faculty of color, we're very rigorous about following the rules. This is the human behavioral procedural part of this that we need to pay attention to. Faculty search committees are highly subject to affinity bias and typically aren't skilled in recruiting and interviewing, and they use fit as heuristics. What this means is that affinity bias is people like me, people I connect with, people I want to be around. And when that's a heuristic, which means it's the way that I'm making a decision, we tend to overlook aspects of their performance, aspects of their past. We tend not to ask the behavioral interviewing questions because we're talking about golf or horse racing or kids or who you knew at Princeton, or, we're finding the connectivity that makes us feel great, but it has nothing predictive in it about how good they're going to do as faculty in research and collaboration in the classroom. We can do a lot with this, and actually there's a training that is being offered here on campus specifically on faculty recruitment that's designed to mitigate against this. So if you haven't taken it, make sure that you find out from Patrice Carroll over here, wave your hand, when it's being offered, and to bring it into your school to make sure that every single search committee, before they do search, goes through this training, and not just once, because this takes several, goes. And then there are limited attempts to source potential faculty of color, as I said earlier, not accessing databases or HBCUs. So this is where bias is impacting our decision making. And this is not just true for the faculty, it's just this particular research piece is true for faculty. We've got to learn how to talk about bias and accept that it's just part of our human functionality and that it is not something that we're to be ashamed of, but it's something that we need to see. It's difficult to see in ourselves. It's much easier to see in somebody else. And so creating a climate of social belonging in your world, whatever that is, one of the great benefits of that is that we can then talk about, so what did you see in this candidate? Who did they remind you of? What were the triggers for you? What did you love about him? What did you not like? Let's expose that, not as a way to make ourselves wrong, but as a way to move aside the projections and the associations that make most of our decisions for us so that we can be as objective as possible. One of the deans yesterday said, so we hired a faculty member who at the time was too good to be true. We were just like, oh my God, this is not real. And it turns out that it wasn't. And he said, when do we, like, how are we supposed to know? We were talking about intuition and gut feeling. It was so, you know how some people are really seductive in their presentation? When it's too good to be true, people, it usually is. And so the cue for you is, the belly says, fabulous. Then we need to kick into what we call our slow brain, and we need to say, okay, what data points have we missed? And that's it. And it's hard to do that on our own, so we need to do that with each other. So here are some hallmarks of what we call bias consciousness. Number one, that we are aware of our own biases. If you're not familiar with the implicit association test, go and take the test. The test is not a report card on your soul. It's simply a reflection of your patterning as a young person, and very difficult to see these things. So take the test. The second one is to recognize the circumstances under which bias occurs. And just be conscious of when you're tired, that you want to make sure that you're pausing, you're oxygenating your brain before you make decisions. Or you put off a decision until you can be fresh. Actively dissect processes. Go into the processes that are within your sphere of influence and even outside that sphere of influence, and look at them, and then use your influence. One of the things that I know to be true about all of us as human beings is that our spheres of influence are much greater than we think they are, and that we get caught up in the politics of our systems, and that shrinks our spheres of influence. I want to invite you to be courageous, committed warriors and warrioresses, and to just raise the question. We're always waiting for somebody else to raise the question. And I'm asking you directly to, next time you see, this isn't going to give us, in this decision, we don't have people impacted by the decision, we don't have their data, to ask the question, because the question is there to be asked. That you're willing to examine your own projections and associations with others, to be as objective as possible. I'm willing to say, wow, you're so familiar to me. You remind me so much of so-and-so who I really like or I really dislike. Not to your face, okay? But you're willing to bring it up so that you get it out of the way so that you can make a decision. And then finally, you invest in developing meaningful relationships across identity. People who work in the world of critical race theory believe that this one act is the one that will mitigate our, at least our racism, our bias against people who are from different racial backgrounds than us, that this is the one that makes the biggest difference. Look into your social network and just ask yourself, be real. Where do I have a relationship and where do I not? So here's your personal action. Take the IAT. Take stock of your most recent decisions where you know bias could be a factor. Really look at them. Look at the performance reviews you've done over the last 3 years. Drive HR crazy. Hey, can I have a printout, please, of my last 3 years? And just look to see how your highest rated people, ask yourself those hard questions. How similar to me or different than me are they? And the last one is identify a bias buddy. Someone in the School of Medicine talked about this when we did a 3-day lab a couple of months ago. And he's got somebody who is, I suppose it's someone that he works with regularly, who kicks him under the table or talks to him afterwards whenever he says something that could potentially be exclusionary, and then they debrief it. I think that is so brilliant and so courageous. White guy, straight white guy. He's really committed to this. He recognizes that, you know, bias is part of all of his decisions, and he's really committed to learning. It's a learning journey. Risky stuff, fabulous, demonstrates incredible courage and commitment. Try it on. But, you know, make sure you have the relationship there before you ask the question, will you be my bias buddy? Okay, curiosity. We're moving down the pike here. Highly inclusive leaders have an open mindset, a desire to understand how others view and experience the world, and a tolerance for ambiguity. That's what curiosity is. Hallmarks of a curious leader. Going out of your way to invite the views of someone who is decidedly different than you. Huge. Warren Buffett surrounds himself with people from completely different worldviews because he knows that the best investment decisions take into account things that he cannot see, but that other people can. Surround yourself with people who have a different view. Intentionally expand your worldview by including the world of others. Suspend judgment so you can try to see the way someone else sees and experiences the world. Walk in somebody else's shoes. Ask great questions. And cultivate an open or a growth mindset. Carol Dweck is at Stanford University, and her work is on having a growth or a global mindset. Fixed mindset people are people who know the answers, and academia trains us to know the answers. It's very challenging in this environment. We know, I got it, it's good, I got it, I studied this, I know. And a growth mindset is one in which you're open to being influenced by somebody else because you actually don't know. You can be deeply expert in your field and have incredibly deep expertise, which cuts us off from knowing something outside of that. So look for inspiration. Look for information that gets your mental juices flowing. Write down your inspirations because that stimulates growth mindset. Keep a learning journal. When you write things down, see if there are any actions that are associated with that. So, personal action, how can I be more curious? Elizabeth Lesser is an educator and an MD who's in the sort of the alternative health world. She has a process called Take the Other to Lunch. Now, in today's world, in the next 2 weeks, you have a great opportunity to learn something about somebody else's worldview. We have never been more polarized in this country, ever. Regardless of what side you're on, and you know what I'm talking about, we have incredible judgments about each other's views and positions and potential actions on November 8th. So here's the task. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Find one, and I know you know one, whoever you are, and sit down and first get yourself clear over here, right? You're not going in for a battle. You're going in simply to understand somebody else's worldview. Share some of your life experiences. Tell the story, how you became who you are. Find out who people are. What are the issues that are most concerning to you about what's happening in life? What have you always wanted to ask someone from the other side? And do that. Just ask them. You know, ask them anything that you want, but you're creating a safe space. And then finally, see if there's anything for you that you need to clean up with people like them. And to just say, you know, I got to say that I've always judged blank, and mostly it's because I didn't understand, and then acknowledge, and I really appreciate you sitting with me for an hour and just sharing your worldview. Risky stuff builds social belonging, builds relationship. We can connect and relate to people who are different. It takes more cognitive resources, more oxygen and glucose. And it's worth the investment. Ready? Here we go. Cultural intelligence. Highly inclusive leaders are confident and effective in cross-cultural interactions. So there are 4 levels when we talk about cultural intelligence. Here's what those levels are. First is being motivational. That we invest the energy and interest towards learning about and engaging in cross-cultural interactions. Cross-cultural is anyone whose cultural background is different than mine. We have many opportunities here in Lexington to engage in cross-cultural interactions. And I'm not just talking about your international students and faculty. You know, cross-cultural could be people from Appalachia, could be people from Washington State, could be people from northern New York. It could be regional, you know, to find out, really understand somebody's worldview. The cognitive is to learn for yourself about relevant cultural norms, practices, and conventions. You know, we can't know everything there is to know about every culture, and every convention and norm in every culture doesn't apply to every individual. But you can do the reading. There are volumes and volumes of academic work and practical business work. One of them off the top of my head is called Kiss, Shake, or Bow. So do a little bit of learning. You know, notice who is from somewhere else in your world. Get on the internet, read a book, find out some cultural norms about them, and then ask the questions. Take the other for lunch. But you've got to arm yourself with some knowledge. Don't assume that what you've learned is true for them, but use it as a basis to find that out. Metacognitive is the practice of your conscious awareness during interactions. There's a TED Talk, the name that I can't remember, which is on listening, which points to that we can listen to 1.6 conversations fully and completely at any given time. That means that I can be fully conscious of this conversation right here, and 6/10 can be focused on processing what's happening over here in my own head. That takes great awareness, and it's a muscle that we want to build, because I can be conscious of my own judgments and assessments that are happening as I'm engaging deeply with you, which cues me into, are you open? Have you closed off? Are you judging? Are you present? Are you comparing? And so practicing that metacognitive action. And then behavioral is just checking in with your appropriate verbal and nonverbal actions, and to make sure that you're congruent with what's being expected from you. This is a place of deep misunderstanding and judgment about each other, is that when we don't know what these mean. I have to tell you, so I'm a little germy right now, people. Actually, I think I'm not germy, I'm post-germy, we'll go with that. But I'm a hugger, you know, and I love to shake hands, and I love to really connect. And what I'm noticing this week is that like a really warm handshake for me, or a hug, really communicates to people how I feel about them. And not being able to do that, if it's because it's not like what I'm committed to, I'm committed more to your well-being. But I'm noticing that when I'm in cultures, which I often am, where people don't shake hands, that I notice in my body there's a cognitive dissonance. That I feel like I'm not able to convey and communicate from my own cultural self what I want to by not being able to physically touch you. And other people are really good with that. They're like, we don't touch. But I'm noticing for myself, and that's the metacognitive piece, is it doesn't feel right over here, and it's good because it's what's appropriate in this culture. So just being conscious of that. Here's a little demonstration of cross-cultural behavior in action.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge. Which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in over 80 countries across the globe. HSBC, the world's local bank.
That's the knowledge piece, people. You better know what's happening around you. So, how can I be more culturally intelligent? So just really look around you and see where you're missing somebody. particularly students, by the way, international students, social belonging is so important to international students. Learn something about their culture, arm yourself, and then go out there and take somebody to lunch and just sit. And people love to talk about themselves and where they're from and what's important to them, and share. And don't just do that with students, do it across the organization. Okay, here we go, collaboration. This is our last one? Maybe it is. Okay. Highly inclusive leaders empower individuals as well as create and leverage the thinking of diverse groups. This is big. Being able to stimulate ideas from groups of people requires all of the other leadership competencies. It requires knowledge of bias. It requires commitment. It requires courage. And there are things that can get in the way of being collaborative. It requires a deep knowledge of group process. So there are things that get in the way of that, and one of them is our normative behavior in groups. So to really get the best out of groups, we've got to be very conscious of our own behavior. You as leaders, we as leaders, need to see what the group dynamic is and be able to intervene in that. Here's an example of what we do. If I can make this go here, I may not be able to. Hold on. Here's an example of what we do when we are in groups.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid campus staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before.
Well, there he goes. There he goes. That's what we do, and this is also what we do. Collaboration is where ideas come from, because I can't generate them from my own worldview. We've got to be able to engage with each other and bounce them off each other, but then we get into a group and we don't share them. So your ability to bring forward, to be able to put together diverse groups, to be able to generate that diversity of opinion, which is where the collaboration stands on, to be able to stimulate independence of thought, where people are bringing together their own thoughts, not the thoughts of the others, where we have processes for making decisions, like well thought out process for how are we going to decide what we're going to move forward on. And where we have people in the collaboration process who actually have something to contribute to that process, that's how we actually get to do collaboration. Otherwise, we're just putting together a group of people, and what's going to come out of that group is what I came in with, because I'm not conscious of the power dynamics, or I let people's positional authority override the ideation that's going to happen in collaboration or whatever. So being aware of this is important. So the hallmarks of a collaborative and inclusive leader: assemble teams that are diverse in their thinking, intentionally ensure that there are no out-groups on a team, turn towards conflict rather than away from it. This is big. When you put together diverse groups, what you're asking for is difference of perspective, and depending on our own level of sophistication about conflict, we regress to like 3, and we shut it down. But that's actually exactly why we put together those groups. And then create a speak up environment on your team. So, these are 6 hallmarks of inclusive leaders. And so just have a look at the board and just put a check mark, write a note, do something that, that marks where you're going to put your own attention. 6 things is a lot, but just find the 1 or 2 that inspire you to action right now. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of things. First, I'm going to show you what you can do. And by the way, if you want access to the slide deck, I'm happy to share it with you. Just leave me your business card on that table there, and I'll send it to you. These are things that you can do. You can participate in and sponsor unconscious bias trainings in your departments. Cook Ross has trained, I don't know, 40 some, I don't know how many people in countries. A lot.
Train the train.
Yeah.
We're about 20.
Yeah, we train 20 people on campus who are delivering trainings across the organization. If you're a trainer, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 people in the room right now. Bring the training into your departments, number 1. Here's what else you can do. Sponsor and support community dialogue across your group and across campus. Don't turn away from the opportunity. We've got a lot to work with in today's world. You know, so bring people together, even if you don't know where it's going to go. Over-sponsor people on your teams and department who are outside the dominant group. What this means is listen for their contributions. Over-listen. It doesn't mean treat them differently. People get all their panties up in a knot about this. It's treating them special and different. No. I'm talking about making sure, since our default is to not hear, you're wanting to make sure that you're hearing them. That's what over-sponsorship means to me. Stimulate discussion around you that is caused by otherness. If you are in the non-dominant group, practice patience and compassion. And the same thing is true if you are in the dominant group. That's what this work requires. So there's a lot happening on campus. There's a lot of training. We've done train the trainers. We've done an assessment, a climate assessment on campus around this work that was done actually by your institutional research arm. We're still looking at the data. As you know, I've done this education work with your administration and your board of trustees. There's ongoing work on campus. There's been strategic planning done. What am I forgetting, Patrice? Other things we wanted to highlight.
But you've already mentioned the faculty search effort.
We're doing the faculty search training to make sure that we're making the best decisions that we can.
That's right.
1,400 people have been trained?
Pardon me?
1,400?
Yes.
1,400 people have been trained on campus already. That's amazing. That's really, really great. There's a lot happening on campus. That's just in the one slice of these 6 aspects. Get involved. Really draw the line in the sand for yourself. Get involved. I'm going to leave you with a video that I love because I think that this video is what all of this is pointing towards, what social belonging is pointing towards, and the kind of climate that we're trying to create through this work. And so I leave you with this, and I'll be around for some questions if you have questions.
My heart doesn't see race. Love has no age limit.
We are neighbors and best friends.
We all have different religions, but we have universal love as well. I love my sister. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
This is our client who made this piece. Thank you all very much.